Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to EBMUD's Landscape Advisory Committee General Meeting with a special presentation on water conservation for the next decade. My name is Kristen Bowman, and I am a water conservation representative here at EBMUD, and I am joined with my colleague, Jolene Bertetto, and the EBMUD Water Conservation Manager, Alice Toohey. So before we get to our special presentation, I do want to go through a couple logistics. One is that this webinar is being recorded. So by participating, you agree to be on a recorded webinar. There's two, everyone is muted, but you have a chat button and a Q&A button. If you wouldn't mind using the chat button to talk amongst yourselves, we have a really talented group of folks here today, people from the University of Berkeley, HOA representatives, master gardeners, school district representatives, LAC committee members, other water districts, landscape designers, contractors, and public works. So I know you guys have a lot of information and to share. So go ahead and use the chat button for that. For questions for the presenter, if you could use the Q&A button. We are going to be waiting till the end of the presentation to answer questions, and we look forward to that dialogue. But you can go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A button at any time. I will be sending out a follow-up email, which will have a recording of this presentation, and also links to many of the resources that we discuss. There will be an evaluation, just a 3-question evaluation that will be sent to you. If you wouldn't mind taking a quick minute to fill that out, it really helps with our planning. And for those of you who are new to an LAC committee meeting, just real brief, about 33 years ago, EBMUD and the landscape industry formed a partnership to bring sustainable landscape practices to our service area. We partner in many different ways. One is coming together quarterly to really have peer dialogue and to be sharing information between each other. So before we begin with our presentation, I do want to cover some upcoming events and also our water supply. So a lot going on this spring, something for everyone. Starting tomorrow, Rescape is offering an MWELO plan check. You can just go to their website to sign up. And then in March 10th, a firescaping qualification training. So you may be getting some questions from your customers about firescaping. This is a good place to learn some more information. EBMUD will be hosting, along with Our Water, Our World, a spring garden maintenance practices webinar. That's March 24th from 1 to 2. It will be in English with Spanish interpretation, and you can sign up for that at ebmud.com, and I'll be sending you a link to this. Just a heads up, like if for some reason your day isn't going the way you thought and you don't make it to the 1 o'clock, if you register, you will get the video. So you can look at it later. And we will also be re-recording this presentation in Spanish. So people will be getting the whole video in Spanish. If you know all these links, please be sure to share it amongst your networks to help us spread the word on these opportunities. Contra Costa Water District is offering WaterWise Landscape Design and Plant Selection. That's a webinar Wednesday, March 30th. And then we're still getting a lot of questions about sheet mulching and compost selection. And as a reminder, our super rebate does require sheet mulching. So this is a good place to bring either tips or questions that you have about sheet mulching. April 14th, 1 to 2. Again, this is English and Spanish interpretation. Bring Back the Natives Tour. There's 2 options. One, you can go virtually April 16th and 17th, or in person April 30th. And May 1st. EBMUD and Contra Costa Water District and Ruth Bancroft Garden are also working together to bring an in-person garden tour April 23rd, and that link is just coming together. Contra Costa Water District is offering Drip Irrigation 101 April 27th. And then EBMUD is hosting a landscape rebate virtual office hour, and this is geared toward HOAs and multifamily residents. This is May 19th from 12 to 1. This is not a webinar, it's a meeting, and we're really looking for folks who are champions at their HOA, who are able to push through a landscape project, see water savings, and have the HOA really pleased with their new landscape, kind of help folks and guide folks who are looking to go through that process with their HOA. So please join us for that meeting, 12 to 1, May 19th. In terms of our water supply, I think that it's probably pretty well known that we've had another dry year. This is this graph shows us how much our water precipitation in the Mokelumne River watershed. So the y-axis here on the left shows us precipitation in inches per month. And you can see in October, we had a banner October with almost 4 times our average. Okay, the average is indicated by the white bar. And then November was pretty low. And then again, in December, we were about double of our average, which was great. And January and February were pretty dry. And that pattern also was what we saw here in the East Bay, more locally, a lot of rain in October, and then a lot of rain in December. So there are water sensors in the snow in the Sierras that measure how much water is in the snow. And so this shows you percent normal for this time of year. This is where we're getting our water in the Central Sierra. So we're at about 71% of average for this time of year with the amount of water in the snow, water content. And you can see it's a little bit better than northern Sierras and a little bit better than southern Sierras. Probably some of those atmospheric rivers that came through hit us a little more directly. And we're a little bit above the statewide average, but still it's below average. This graph shows us water production. So it's basically how much water our service area is using in million gallons per day. So 2005, 2007 is kind of our base year, and you can see at the peak of the water season, it's about 300 million gallons per day that our service area uses. The green line shows you what we were using last year. So you can see there's a big difference there, and a lot of that is behavior changes and good job with conserving water. So it stayed below our baseline all year. And this is about when we went into our voluntary drought stage 1, about in April 2021. And so this is where we are this year. Starting in July, we asked for 10% voluntary cutback, and we did really pretty well with that almost all year. And here we are now, it's climbing up a little bit towards our 2005 baseline. So if we were to look at that in a table, I know there's a lot of numbers here, but it's really this bottom percent change that we're going to focus on. You can see 8% less, 9%, 15%, 18% in November. You know, we had a lot of rain in October and December, so you can see all the water we saved in comparison to the year before. And now we're climbing a little bit. In February, we're 10% higher than we were last year. So likely people are turning on their irrigation. I know we've had a couple, dry months in a row. But remember, we're not at the peak irrigation season. We're not in July. I know we've had a lot of sun and dry days. But just, be sure to be looking at your irrigation schedule, make sure that you're not doing peak run times, and just spot water as needed to keep your plants alive. Overall, our district saved to date about 8% less than last year, and that's really good. So this shows your total system storage, and which is measured in total acre feet. And we project about how much water we're going to have in all of our reservoirs by September. Okay, so the projection with 90% exceedance, which is likelihood, we're going to be, if this dry weather continues, probably at 470 acre feet by the end of September. And that number is triggers whether or not we're in a drought stage 1, drought stage 2, or what the board decides. It's at about that number that we consider what drought stage we are in. If we end up having a lot of rain in March, we'll be closer to this 585 total acre feet. And that pretty much clears us from a drought stage. So we can hope for a rainy March. And then in terms of supplemental water supply, just a couple things. You may remember last year, a lot of the municipalities got a little bit blindsided by the fact that the soil was so dry that a lot of the water soaked into the soil before it got to the reservoir. And so we're adjusting our forecast based on that lower soil moisture. We were drawing off using our pumping station off the Sacramento, and we restarted that in February. We turned it off when we got all that rain in December, but we restarted it in February. And we're working on our contract for the 2022 Central Valley Project supply for next year. And also, if we end up having a wet March, we will resuspend any imports if our hydrology improves. So I know that was a lot. Hopefully you were able to catch some of that. We are going to be covering many of these topics in our presentation on Water Conservation Strategic Plan 2021. And here to walk us through this ambitious plan is EBMUD's Water Conservation Manager, Alice Toohey. Over the past 14 years, Alice has worked in various EBMUD divisions, including water recycling, water resources planning, and water conservation. Alice holds a BA in physics from Bryn Mawr College and a master's in environmental engineering from the University of California, Berkeley. I'd like to welcome Alice.
Thanks so much, Kristen. And thank you everybody for joining us here this afternoon. I'm hoping that, this will be, some useful information. And I'm also really hoping that at the end we can have kind of a lively discussion. And I'm really anxious to hear your questions and thoughts on this. I'm going to be talking about our 2021 update of our Water Conservation Strategic Plan. And I want to stress, I might be doing the presentation, but this was the work of a lot of people, including staff in water conservation, like Kristen and Jolene, as well as staff in other departments at EBMUD, graphics folks, Emily Songster, who made the document look amazing, and folks in other departments who provided input and context. Next slide, please. So I'm going to be starting off by just providing a little bit of background, and some of this might be familiar to a lot of you, but I'm going to just provide some background on EBMUD, our conservation program. I'm going to talk about some of the drivers for conservation for us in the future, what our goals are, and then I'm going to really dive into the plan itself and spend the bulk of my time just talking about the different program elements, the different sort of projects and tools and resources that we plan to use to help achieve our goals. And at the very end, I do have a few slides on what I'm calling the LAC connection, where I want to talk a little bit about, why the LAC is such an important group and how I'm hoping that we can work together to implement some of these projects and reach these goals. And I see a question in the chat. So this plan was published at the end of 2021. So it was published last year, but it's got a 10-year planning horizon. So the idea is we update this plan every 10 years to reflect new goals and new programs. Absolutely. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Oh, you don't see it? Oh, Alice, I think, Alice, you're stuck.
Next slide, please.
Okay, and we are on the next slide. I'm looking at it.
Okay, there it is, background. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a little bit frozen on our end. Sorry about that, everyone. So just a little bit of background on EBMUD and our water supply. So this is a picture of Pardee Reservoir. About 90% of EBMUD's water supply comes from the McCulmy River watershed that Kristen mentioned. Next slide, please.
Oh, you're having a drag.
Okay. Okay, now I'm seeing it. So from the snowflake to the bay. So this slide shows our overall water supply infrastructure. You can see there Pardee Reservoir and Comanche Reservoir. That's where our water comes from. You can see we've got about 92 miles of aqueducts that take that water and bring it into our service area. You can also see highlighted in green there our Freeport project. That was a project that we constructed. I think we finished construction back in around 2010. And that allows us to take water off the Sacramento River and move it into our system. So like Kristen mentioned, we have a contract with the Bureau of Reclamation where during certain dry years, we can take water from the Central Valley project to supplement our own supplies. And that's very useful to us during dry years in order to kind of manage our water supply and limit the amount of rationing we have to ask our customers for. Next slide, please. But we do know in California, as Kristen mentioned, we have a very variable water supply. We are in a drought right now. We're used to droughts. They're just a way of life in California. And with climate change, we can expect more frequent and potentially more severe droughts. So East EBMUD's long-term water supply planning, it's not enough for us to just rely on that existing water supply that we have off the McCalmy. We also look at diversifying our water supply portfolio so that we can ensure that in the future we have enough water for our customers, particularly during droughts and particularly during these multi-year droughts where we just don't have enough water on our McCalmy supply. So you can see here that water conservation is a key part of our overall water supply planning portfolio. We also look at things like recycle water, and we have a separate master plan that deals with that. We look at water transfers where we can buy water from other agencies and move it into our system. And we're also piloting a couple of projects on groundwater banking, which is really exciting, where during wet years, you put water into the groundwater aquifer so that then it's there when you need it during dry years. We're exploring the Los Vaqueros Reservoir. That's a project that Contra Costa Water District is looking at expanding that reservoir and looking at a regional partnership. And you can see here that I've got a separate sort of puzzle piece for partnerships because one thing that we've seen in California is just the importance of working together as sort of a larger community to ensure a water supply. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, water conservation is very important to East EBMUD. It has been for a long time. We've been doing conservation in one form or another since at least the 1970s, but the program was really formalized in the 1980s. We developed our first urban water management plan in 1985, and that included a list of conservation efforts to help us achieve the goal of 18 million gallons per day of water conserved by 2005. So in 1986, the Water Conservation Division was actually formed. So, recognizing the importance of conservation and the need to have staff dedicated to implementing this plan. The early days of the program focused on things like audits, device distribution, preparing educational materials, but there was even then a focus on developing guidelines for landscaping. So even back then, we recognized the importance of outdoor water use. And as Kristen mentioned, the Landscape Advisory Committee was actually formed in 1988, so relatively early on in the program's history. And again, that was a directive from our board recognizing the importance of forming these connections and really working with the landscape industry collaboratively to try to save water. Our first water conservation plan was developed in 1994. You can see a picture of it there in the upper left. That plan included a lot of discussion of rebates, things like toilet rebates, clothes washers, that kind of thing. We completed our plant book in 2005, Plants and Landscapes for Summer Dry Climates. You can see a picture of it there. And that book remains very popular today. Next slide, please. And Kristen, you can maybe just kind of click through these, just to kind of show some examples. Our program has evolved quite a bit over the years. You can see here, we had our original water conservation master plan. We updated it in 2011. We continue to produce other planning documents. A really important foundational document for us was our WCSP 2040. This was published in 2012, and this is where the district kind of took a step back and took a really big holistic look at our future water supply needs and our demands and our different water supplies. And our board at that time set very ambitious goals for water conservation and chose one of the highest levels of water conservation to commit to. Another important document that this relates to is our urban water management plan. We've been completing these documents. They're updated every 5 years since 1985. Here's a picture of the most recent one that was completed based on calendar year 2020. And again, that's a document that goes into details about our overall water supply planning, the challenges that we face, how we're going to meet those challenges. It also includes our water shortage contingency plan. that outlines how we respond to droughts. And then the last image here is the cover of our newly updated Water Conservation Strategic Plan 2021 that just came out. I believe we just published it, got the printed versions last December. And these documents, EBMUD does a lot of long-term planning. So, our Water Conservation Strategic Plan aligns with all these documents and also other documents like we're working on our very first Water Loss Control Master Plan. We have a raw water master plan and other documents that we do to ensure that we're prepared for the future. Next slide, please. So some of our future program drivers. So as we were kind of thinking big picture about this strategic plan, some of the things that we were thinking about that are important for the future that we wanted to make sure we included. Obviously, drought, as I mentioned, is a way of life in California, and we expect with climate change, we're going to be seeing more droughts. So we want to make sure that we have a program that's prepared to respond to that. We want to make sure that we're using water efficiently at all times, but also that we have a conservation program that's flexible and that can respond to those drought scenarios and achieve those additional short-term reductions in water use that we need. But we do also recognize the effects of demand hardening. So demand hardening is this concept in water conservation where, as people use water more efficiently, it does get a little bit harder to achieve those short-term savings. For example, pretty much everybody in California, most folks in California at this point have efficient toilets, have efficient clothes washers. So, we can't just do a rebate program to replace people's toilets with additional savings. Another important driver for us is regulatory requirements. And you can see that little picture in the bottom left, making water conservation a California way of life. That's a document I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, but there's some state regulations coming down the pipeline that are going to set some ambitious goals for agencies like EBMUD. Communications in the 21st century. I have a little snapshot here from our Twitter feed. The way we communicate with our customers has changed pretty significantly since the 2011 master plan update came out. Now there's a new world of social media. People have digital tools. That people's expectations in terms of how we communicate with them have changed. And last but by no means least, an important driver for us this time around was equity. And that's, you might be familiar with that little picture at the bottom there or something similar to it. The idea that, of equity is that we want to make sure we're providing all of our customers with the tools and resources that they need to meet their water conservation goals. So, making sure as we're developing our programs that we're thinking about our service area as a whole and providing tools for all of our customers. Next slide, please. And you can just maybe bring up all the images, Kristen. Thanks, sorry about that. So regulatory requirements. I mentioned that there's this new state law. It was these two companion bills that were passed in 2018, SB 606 and AB 1668. You might hear people call them, the long-term framework or the long-term water use efficiency regulations. But basically coming out of the last drought, the governor gave the state board and Department of Water Resources a charge to, develop some regulations to make sure that we're using water efficiently at all times. So the way this works is Department of Water Resources and the State Water Resources Control Board are developing these guidelines and these water use objectives. And I want to stress that these are targets that agencies would have to meet. So these are not at the customer level. But the idea is that an agency like EBMUD would be given a water use objective, and that would include a few different components. Like you can see here, we would get an allocation for indoor residential water use based on our population. We'd get an allocation for outdoor residential water use and dedicated commercial irrigation, based on some aerial imagery that the state has done that they've then, kind of used to develop estimates of our irrigated areas and irrigable non-irrigated areas. And then we would also get an allocation for distribution system water losses. Those are all put together and they add up to this annual water use objective that we would have to meet. The state is in the process of finalizing all those guidelines and standards and performance measures, and we would start reporting on this next year. There's still a few things that are up in the air, like you can see in this lower kind of graphic. The regulations originally had some standards for indoor residential use. And again, this is just indoor residential use that would start at 55 gallons per person per day and go down to 50 gallons per person per day in 2030. But DWR has done some studies and they're actually recommending lowering that so that the standard would go down to 47 gallons per person per day in 2025, and then down to 42 gallons per person per day in 2030. So, East Bay Mud is an active participant in developing these regulations. We're paying very close attention to it, but these regulatory requirements are going to be a driver for us going forward. Next slide, please. So you put it all together, and what does it look like? We, several years ago, as part of our demand study, we went through this exercise of, looking at the regulations, looking at our different programs, evaluating participation levels, and we came up with we ran a few different scenarios and came up with a goal for ourselves. So you can see here from 1995 to about 2018. So, the kind of early years of our program up until almost the present, we achieved about 46 million gallons per day of water conservation. That's huge. That's actually a lot of water if you think about it. Previously, I'd mentioned our WSMP 2040 had a goal of achieving 62 million gallons per day of water conservation by 2040. Well, we want to go above and beyond that now. So the new goal that we've set for ourselves for the year 2050 is 70 million gallons per day of water conservation. So if you look at the 46 and you look at the 70, and I can still sometimes remember to do basic math, it's a 24 million gallons per day increase in water conservation. So, we definitely, between this and the goals set by the state, we definitely have our work cut out for us. But, I think we can achieve it. I always tell people our customers are the best. They always respond. They're always interested and excited to save water. So next slide, please. So now I'm going to dive into talking about the plan itself and what it actually includes. And at East Bay Mud, we generally kind of break our water conservation program up into these 6 different components. So water management services, you can think about that as the sort of tools that we provide customers, things like audits, things like home water reports, leak alerts, that kind of thing. Rebates and incentives, everybody knows and loves. That's where we often provide like a financial incentive to customer to help them make changes to their water use. Education and outreach. And that includes not just sort of K through 12 education for kids, but also education to adults, whether just kind of general community outreach or to specific groups, like, for example, working with landscape professionals or, doing education for particular business sectors. Regulation and legislation, and that includes both the regulations that we're subject to, as well as East Bay Mud's own regulations on water use. Supply side conservation, I'm just going to talk about that a little when we get to that part. That's where East Bay Mud, we have to do our part too, to monitor and fix leaks. And then last, but by no means least, research and development. East Bay Mud's always been a leader in this area, and we continue to be so, researching different tools and technologies that can help us save water. So I'm going to dive into all of these a little bit and just talk about some of the, interesting and exciting programs that we have planned. So water management services, you can see here, we've got a picture of our web portal. That's really the engine of our water management services. It provides information customers can log on, they can see their water use, they can set up alerts, they can monitor their consumption trends. And then on the other side, we can do outreach and messaging to our customers based on their water use. And there's some pretty exciting stuff going on with that I'll talk about in a moment. Next slide, please. So some of the tools that we offer through water management services, and I always think about this as, kind of empowering our customers. So we're trying to give them the tools so that they can use their water wisely. You can see here an example of one of our home water reports. We've been sending these out for a long time. Currently, we send them out to any residential customer or even non-residential customer for whom we have an email account. Last year, calendar year 2021, we delivered over 1 million of these home water reports and over 46,000 non-residential reports. So a pretty popular service. It gives customers information about their water use and does some kind of what we call social norms benchmarking. So we say to the customer, hey, you use this much water. Here's how much you compare to other people with similar properties. We also continue to offer our home water survey kit. You can see that up in the upper right-hand corner. That's a really useful tool if customers want to kind of do sort of an audit on their home by themselves. It's sort of, they can order this kit and it sort of guides them through going through their house and checking their water use, looking for common leaks. It's got some toilet dye tabs, a little flow bag. And if customers go through that and they fill out the form and send it back to us, we'll send them any devices that they might need to, be more efficient. Things like, sink aerators, shower heads, that kind of thing. And it's not just residential customers, of course. We do have services for our commercial, institutional, and industrial customers. Like you can see here, a little header for our CII newsletter. And I think I saw Rolando is on this meeting. Rolando is one of our staff who manages the CII newsletter, which goes out quarterly and always includes really great information and articles to help those customers conserve. Of particular interest to the LAC is our IRIS water budgets. So if you'll go to the next slide, I'll talk about that a little more in specific. And some of you might be familiar with this already. So this is a water budget. It goes out every month to our irrigation customers. It's customized. So it incorporates information through GIS. So you can see in that picture, we actually use parcel level information to figure out, the size of the parcel, what kind of landscaping they have. We also use localized water data or weather data to develop this budget for customers. And you can see here, it shows, what their budget is and how they're using water relative to that budget. Right now, we have over 4,000 irrigation only accounts that are signed up to receive these. It might even be over 5,000 at this point. We are planning to modernize this system. We're in the process of kind of taking a look at that since the programming itself is pretty old. And we're also looking at it, potentially expanding it to residential customers. We'd love to be able to, kind of merge this with our home water reports so that when customers are getting those home water reports, it actually gives them a budget. The issue there is just, having a way to, make sure that we're checking the information and having a portal where customers can tell us how many, occupants they have and, what size their landscaping is, that kind of thing. Next slide, please. Some of the new tools and technologies that I want to talk about that I think are really, really exciting, leak alerts. So we have the ability in our software to kind of just, it just sort of monitors water use. And if it sees a sudden spike in water use, it'll actually automatically send out an alert to the customer by email or text message if the customer is signed up for that. That says, hey, something weird's going on, your water use is high, you might want to check it. That includes a link to this leak resolution site where customers can go and it walks them through checking for common household leaks. There are videos, there's links to additional information, and then customers at the very end are invited to report back to us. And I'm always amazed by the success of this program. Last calendar year, we alerted over 40,000 accounts that they had potential leaks. About half of the customers who received those leak alerts opened them, which is pretty good for emails like that. And about 25% clicked through to our digital tool, and about 5% digitally resolved the tool, meaning they actually go through the process and report back to us. And we get a lot of great feedback from customers like, oh, thank you for letting me know about this. It turns out we had a pipe leak, or, oh, I've got the plumber coming, or, oh gosh, it turned out I left a hose on. So that's a very popular service. And one thing you can see here, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to the research part, EBMUD's been doing some pilots looking at advanced metering infrastructure, which is smart meters. Most of our customers, their meter gets read about once every 60 days. So we don't have a lot of data points. But with these smart meters, we're able to get hourly data. And that means we can detect leaks much faster. So rather than having to wait a few months to see if the water use seems higher than usual, we can tell within 3 days that the customer's got a leak. And oftentimes with that level of data, that richness of data, we can even make some guesses as to what's causing the leak. And I have some staff, there's some staff in water conservation who are absolutely amazing at this. They can look at somebody's water leak and water data, and they can say, oh yeah, that's a toilet flapper, or oh, that looks like an irrigation system leak. So really exciting. And it just, I think the key takeaway there is that, having this new technology, having more data gives us better tools to help our customers save water. Next slide, please. So rebates and incentives continue to be important for us. The rebate program looks a little bit different than it maybe did 10, 20 years ago. We have a lot of rebate programs that were so successful that we allowed them to sunset. For example, we're not just generally offering toilet or closed water rebates to customers, because we did a study back in 2017 and found that we'd essentially reached market saturation. Most customers have efficient toilets, and due to code updates, you basically can't buy an inefficient toilet in California anymore. So we're really excited about that. Long ago were the days where we told people to put a brick in their toilet tank to save water every flush. I don't know if anybody else is old enough to remember that, but so we've mostly sunsetted those programs. We do still offer some, toilet and clothes washer and other rebates for some customers, commercial and multifamily. We have a custom rebate program where commercial customers who want to do kind of, new or novel process upgrades can get a rebate from us to do that. But really our main focus is on outdoor water use. And I'll talk about some of those rebates in a moment. And then of course we do offer rebates for gray water, and we have a new flow water rebate that's pretty exciting as well. Next slide. So landscape rebate components, and I think a lot of you are probably aware of these. Lawn replacement, that's pretty important to us. Lawns use a lot of water, so trying to get folks to replace those lawns and put in things like low water use plants, particularly native plants. We also offer rebates for efficient irrigation. If people want to convert to drip, they want to put in high efficiency nozzles, smart controllers, pressure regulators, irrigation submeters. We offer rebates for all of that. Next slide. And we are constantly, upgrading our programs. I mean, last year, due to the drought, we kind of hurried up the implementation of these two new rebates that we've been working on. So the first is our super rebate. Normally we offer 75 cents per square foot for turf replacement. With the super rebate, we'll offer $1.50 as long as customers, well, initially it was use 3 of these best practices. We recently updated it so that customers have to do all 4. Sheet mulching, they have to use compost, they have to put in majority native plants, and they have to plant during the cool season. And that's because we recognize that all of these practices really support better water use efficiency. So we're willing to give customers, more money to do that. And we've seen customers respond. I mean, a lot of our, over the last several months, a lot of our customers who are applying for landscape rebates have been applying for the super rebate. We also released a new program for medians. You can see a picture here. That's that little strip of grass between, the sidewalk and the road, or in the middle of the road. Those are very difficult to irrigate efficiently. So we have offered, again, $1.50 per square foot. It's great for HOAs, cities, commercial properties, and we've started to see some of those rebate applications come in as well, which is really exciting. Next slide, please. Just a couple other rebates I wanted to mention. Gray water, we do offer a rebate for that 3-way converter for those laundry to landscape programs, and we are actually looking at potentially opening up our custom rebate program to single-family residential customers that want to do more intensive gray water programs. That's something that we're evaluating right now that we might do later this year as a pilot. I also did want to talk about our flow meter program. So you can see a couple pictures here. So flow meters, these are devices that the customer buys and installs. It's either something you put on the meter itself, or in some cases it's installed on the home water line. And that provides real-time data on your water use. So similar to what I was mentioning with the AMI, it just gives you more data. A lot of these companies have, they have little portals you can sign up for on your phone where you can set water budgets for your household. You can monitor for leaks. Some of the ones that are hard plumbed onto your line, they're a little more expensive to install because you actually have to, cut into the pipe. But the benefit of those is that there's a remote shutoff capability. So let's say you're away from home on vacation and you get a notification that you've got a leak. You can just close that valve and turn off water to your house and not worry about the leak. And those rebates have been very popular. We launched the flow meter rebate program I want to say it was the end of 2018. Last year, we had over 800 customers who applied for and received rebates for flow meters. So again, I just think that speaks to the fact that our customers are really interested in saving water. Next slide, please. So one thing I want to touch on, and this is all stuff that's kind of new, it's kind of just in the conceptual phases, but we are very much aware, as I mentioned, of the need to incorporate equity into our programs and have that be sort of foundational. So we're looking at developing some new rebate and incentive programs specifically for our lower income customers, because we recognize that oftentimes even our traditional rebate programs, even with EBMUD paying some of the cost, it's still cost prohibitive. There are still barriers to participation for some customers. So EBMUD has, excuse me, a long-standing customer assistance program where we'll basically offer reduced water service rates for customers who meet our qualification requirements, low-income customers. So we've been coordinating more with that CAT program. We've also been investigating a few sort of partnership opportunities. One of the flow meter manufacturers that I mentioned has a program, Flume Cares, where they'll work with utilities to make these devices available to low-income customers. We're looking into that. And then PG&E has its water energy coordination program. So PG&E regularly does energy savings audits where they'll go into homes, they'll do an assessment of the home's energy systems, they can do certain energy upgrades. Through this program, they can also do a small water audit as well. And then in some cases even do some, we could even contract with them potentially to do some upgrades. So that's something we're looking into. There are also a few other agencies around the country who have some really exciting leak repair and assistance programs. For example, San Antonio Water System has their Plumbers to People program where they'll help low-income customers fix leaks. Excuse me, all this talking. So we're just starting to look into some of these types of programs that could help that customer base. Next slide, please. So education and outreach. You can see a picture here where Ben Glickstein and I were doing a program for a summer camp in Oakland that had come to our building. It was absolutely terrifying. We had like over 100 kids. I was just like terrified that we were going to lose somebody or something, but it went okay. We did a educational program. The kids had a lot of fun. So education continues to be important for East Bay MUD. And as a district, we're currently working on updating our educational materials. We have some workbooks that we're working on developing that include education and activities on water conservation. You can also see we regularly come up with tools like our little neighborhood scavenger hunt that we came up with at the beginning of the pandemic for folks that are out doing walks in their neighborhood. And as I mentioned earlier, education and outreach, it's not just K through 12, it's also adults. So it's doing education for the landscaping community, for example, working on the Qualified Water Efficient Landscaper Trainings, QUEL program, and then also doing general education and outreach to our customers. Our public affairs staff did a really great job last year. They put together the speaker series that had a whole, every month a different topic. So I think last June was water conservation, but they also had presentations on things like water supply, water quality, desalination, that kind of thing. Next slide, please. And of course, we are expanding into digital platforms. I think, one thing that came out of this pandemic was, as we made the shift from doing more in-person events to doing more webinars, we really saw the power of that medium and the fact that it oftentimes can enable more folks to participate in meetings and events. So we launched our webinar series in 2020. We expanded it last year and it's still going on. A couple new things. Last year, we piloted a office hours concept. And this is now just a set part of our offerings. So twice a month, customers can sign up and it's a Zoom format, but it's a smaller group format. So customers who have questions about our landscape rebate program, can come and be part of a small group discussion with a couple water conservation staff who can kind of, answer their questions and share information and guide them through the process. And that's been really, really popular. And as Kristen mentioned earlier, we are launching our spring webinar series. I think the first one is March 24th on spring garden maintenance. So we hope to see some of you there. Next slide, please. Demonstration gardens are also an important part of education and outreach that, Kristen and I thought this group in particular might be interested in. Some of you are probably familiar with these. We recognize that getting away from lawns is a bit of a paradigm shift for a lot of people. So as part of, sort of changing that paradigm and getting people to sort of rethink landscaping, we fund demonstration gardens. So we'll provide grants of up to $15,000 for community groups, or in some cases, cities or schools that want to put in these public demonstration gardens that showcase water efficient landscaping. Next slide. Advertising and marketing. So this is just to say that, this is obviously important, as I mentioned earlier, in the 21st century, when you're communicating with customers, the expectations and the tools are different. Last year, in response to the drought, we released our Make Every Drop Count campaign. This included digital and print advertising. It also included some things like streaming audio. We had some little radio snippets that Jolene worked on, some little advertisements on Pandora that recommended 5-minute songs people could listen to in order to time themselves and take a shorter shower. So fun things like that. Next slide. So regulations and legislation, as I mentioned, we do have some state legislation that's coming down the pipe that's going to have a pretty significant impact on our program. But East Bay MUD, we have water regulations as well. So one important part of that is our Section 31 reviews. So if anyone is applying for new or expanded water service at East Bay Mud, it has to undergo a review where we check to make sure that it's meeting our water efficiency requirements, things like MWLO, things like, code requirements for fixtures and appliances. Next slide. And supply side conservation. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, although it's a really big effort for East Bay Mud. But we do recognize that we need to, we can't just talk the talk. We've got to walk the walk and make sure that we're managing our own systems and not wasting water. Historically, several years back, we did an assessment and we figured out that we were replacing about 10 miles of pipe a year. And we have over 4,000 miles of pipe in our distribution system. So we realized that we needed to kind of pick up the pace. So we have our pipeline rebuild program that's working on developing a plan to increase that from 10 to 40 miles per year of pipe replaced. And I think right now we're at around 20 miles per year. We also do things like pressure management, leak detection. You can see here in the picture, new techniques to find leaks. We use acoustic tools and satellite technology to help us detect leaks. We're working on improving the speed and quality of repairs and just generally doing good infrastructure management to make sure that we're not leaking and losing water. Next slide. And last but by no means least, research and development. So as I mentioned earlier, East Bay Mud has long been a leader in research and development in water conservation. Some of the areas for us of focus for the future, behavioral changes. So, how do we communicate with our customers to help them to understand their water use and make changes? You can see that picture in the upper right. That's, as I mentioned, California, as part of its sort of long-term water use efficiencies regulations, there's some new techniques involving using aerial imagery to determine what type of landscaping people have so you can develop a water budget. So you can see here, you start with that just aerial image, just the actual photo. And then there's machine learning and computer software that can take that photo and translate that into sort of irrigated areas, that can say, oh, this looks like this is a house, this is hardscape, this is a tree, etc. In the picture in the lower left, that's a meter testing setup. We do a lot of work on meters. Meter accuracy and testing is very important to us in order to make sure that we're not losing water and to make sure that we're billing customers fairly. And then last but by no means least, we have a lot of research planned around sort of leak detection and supply side conservation. Next slide. One particular area that I do want to talk about in terms of research is, as I mentioned earlier, AMI. So we have 2 pilot studies that we just finished up. One of them in cooperation with UC Davis and PG&E, and the other with funding from the US Bureau of Reclamation. And you can see all those little dots. Those are all the smart meters that we've installed in our service area. So we did these studies to kind of look at the potential water and energy savings that are associated with having this hourly data. Because again, if we have that better data, we can let customers know about leaks sooner. If it's October and it started raining, we can tell when somebody's irrigating and can send them a message and say, hey, you might want to check your irrigation system. And we can provide better data to our customers so that they can make informed choices about their water use. So we did do these 2 studies and we did see that, having that better data did lead to water savings. So currently the district is, we recently hired a consultant who's going to be doing what's called the business case for AMI for us. So they're going to be looking at the potential costs and benefits of doing a district-wide AMI implementation. We've got about 400,000 meters in our service area. So as you can imagine, it's pretty expensive to do something like that. So we want to make sure we're making an informed decision, choosing the best technology, and also thinking about how we would potentially phase that in. But we think that that's very exciting from a water conservation perspective, because again, that just gives us better tools for understanding our customers' water use and helping them. Next slide. So I know I've gone through kind of a whirlwind, and that's not even all of our programs. That's just some of the high level projects and activities that we have planned. How are we going to actually do this? Well, some of the sort of implementation strategies that we've identified that sort of cross the different customer, classes and the different programs, obviously marketing and outreach, making sure that we're, communicating with our customers, making sure that our customers know about the programs that we offer. Partnerships are very important to us. And you, the LAC, are a key partner. And I'll talk about that more in a moment. We also have partnerships with nonprofits like the California Native Plant Society, Rescape. We partner with other water agencies on, developing, regional programs and educational tools. Grant funding is going to be very important for us, especially when we're talking about, some of these, more expensive projects like AMI. We're going to be looking for state and federal funding to help us do that in a way that's affordable for our customers. And then last, but by no means least, as I said before, the importance of technology and just continuing to, kind of monitor new tools that are out there to help us and to help our customers save water. Next slide. So what does this mean for you, the LAC connection? And earlier I was trying to have a little like Kermit the Frog picture on there. I don't know if anybody's familiar with, the rainbow connection, but I'm not good enough at Photoshop, so I apologize for that. But I did want to talk a little bit about how the LAC fits into this, because you were kind of a key partner for us in meeting these goals, and you're also a key partner for us in terms of just developing our programs in general and expanding what we offer. So I'm hoping that we can build on the history that we have as East Bay MUD and the LAC working together. I'm hoping you can maybe find places where you can help us to develop and implement these programs. And I'm also going to invite you to challenge us as we go forward to do more and to look at new ways to develop our programs. So the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, you're a key partner. Some of the things that I find really inspirational and important about the LAC as I think about our long-term planning is you're helping us to change that paradigm. As I mentioned, there's still a lot of folks who think when they think landscaping, they think green lawns. So we want to change that paradigm. We want folks to be thinking about, what are appropriate plants, what for their area, what is water efficient. We hope that the LAC is a forum for networking, for peer-to-peer discussions, that it can be a vehicle for professional development, and that we can work together on education and outreach. Next slide. But as I mentioned, it's a two-way street, right? So I hope that, it's not just us saying to you like, okay, here's our plan, like, we want your help with it, but I hope that we can have a dialogue. We look forward to hearing from you, as always, on your feedback on our programs and rebates, working together to develop new tools, materials, resources for our customers, innovation and testing new technologies, and anything else that you can think of. Again, I just want to really stress that we appreciate the partnership that we've got with the LAC and all the projects that we've worked on together, and hope that we can continue to do that in the future. Next slide. So I've talked for a good 45 minutes now. Obviously, I'm a little bit hoarse, but I did want to open it up for questions. I don't know, Jolene or Kristen, if there's any questions in the Q&A that we can respond to, or if folks want to add anything in.
Yes, we can start with the questions in the Q&A. And I'll just start here at the top. How does the fluctuation in population figure in the conservation calculation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it does factor in. One of the groups that the district monitors are sort of population levels and does regular projections. So we use both census data for that, and then ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, does population projections based on conversations with cities and counties. When we were developing our demand study, a key part of that was reaching out to cities and counties in our service areas to understand their growth plans. East Bay MUD is not, we're not a land use agency, but so we talk to the cities and the counties. So for example, we'd go to the city of Oakland and they'd say, yeah, we're expecting over the next 10 years that we're going to have, this many single family housing units go in and this many multifamily housing units go in. And we go to San Ramon and they'd say, oh yeah, we've got these 2 new developments planned. Or we'd talk to a customer, we'd go and talk to a city who would say, actually, we're seeing a lot of, we're seeing some decline in business, or we're seeing, some more mixed use going in, or whatever it happened to be. So we took all that information from the cities and counties and put all that together to figure out sort of what, things would look like for our service area going out to the year 2050.
Excellent. And can you elaborate on equity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So equity, and we always, East Bay MUD, like a lot of organizations, has been grappling with diversity, equity, and inclusion. We actually have a new office that was formed with a new position reporting to our general manager. And we actually just last week at our board meeting, our board of directors approved our DEI strategic plan. So equity, and we always talk about equity rather than equality. Equality is sort of, treating everyone the same, whereas equity is giving everyone the tools and resources that they need to achieve or to reach their goals. So that includes a lot of different things for us. That includes thinking about, what languages we're offering materials in. And that was actually one of the kind of key components of the DEI strategic plan is doing some more kind of deep investigation and research and thinking on sort of languages, like what languages are spoken in our service area, in what parts of our service area, what communication tools do different communities use to communicate so that we can better communicate with our customers. So it's looking at that. It's also considering things like income level. Like, for example, I mentioned, you might think like, hey, flow meter rebate, that's great. It's the device costs $200, EBMUD pays for $100. That's easy. Well, for some folks, even just paying that $100 is a real barrier. So thinking about how we can develop programs that help our low income customers to conserve water and actually reduce their water bill. So that's just kind of equity in a snapshot as it relates to this plan. But as I mentioned, there is that DEI strategic plan that was just adopted by our board. It's really exciting. It's got a lot of great stuff in it, just in terms of how we function as an organization and also how we sort of interact with the community as a whole and how we can work to improve our engagement with the community. So if you're interested in that, I recommend checking it out. Next question.
So much else. Yeah. How does water storage figure into the long-term strategy?
Yeah, so water storage is part of it. And I just want to stress again that this strategic plan was really focused on water conservation. So we do have other strategic plans that look at different elements, like our urban water management plan talks a little bit about storage. And there was a whole water recycling master plan that was completed, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, relatively recently. Anyways, but storage is important. As I mentioned, we have a few projects that we've identified that would increase the amount of storage that we have. So one of them is a partnership with Contra Costa Water District. They own and operate the Los Vaqueros Reservoir, and they're looking to potentially expand that reservoir and make it more of like a regional facility. So the idea is that EBMUD would sort of buy into that project and we would get a chunk of storage space in that reservoir. We've also been piloting groundwater banking. I used to work on that a little bit. It's pretty cool stuff. The idea is that during wet years, when you have a surplus of water, you inject it back into the groundwater aquifer. And then during droughts, you can extract that water and have it available. And there's, I think, a pretty big potential for, using groundwater for storage. It's a relatively new concept in California, but it's something that's getting a lot of attention. So, new storage is kind of a, part of our overall long-term planning for sure.
This is a question, and anyone in the LAC can chime in on this. You might have some ideas, Alice. Does anyone have any suggestions for low water use alternative that could replace turf? That in areas that like students use, it's a cool place to lay down, or general meeting place, sunbathing, games.
That's a good question. Yeah, and that is something that I think we need to be careful of, right? And I know there's been a lot of discussions, like I know Southern Nevada Water District, so basically LA, they've been working on this ban on what they call non-functional turf. So kind of getting at that idea that there are some areas where, it makes sense to have turf, right? Like if it's a park, if it's a playground. I don't know of any, off the top of my head, any good alternatives. I personally am not a fan of that plastic, fake turf stuff. I'm not a fan personally. I think it's wasteful, but I invite anybody in the LAC to maybe, if you've got ideas or thoughts, maybe add them into the chat.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned this, Alice, but if grass is really being used and it's used for sports, or it's a great place where people are meeting, we're not necessarily advocating to remove that. You might be looking at high efficiency nozzles.
Yeah. And it's worth mentioning that, it's interesting, like, people always think of golf courses as using a lot of water, and they do, but they're actually pretty efficient, right? So some of these larger, lawn or parks, like especially if they have sort of like a professional landscape manager and they've made the investments in that efficient irrigation equipment, can be relatively efficient.
Yeah, so you may just prioritize what lawn you want to keep and what lawn you want to just upgrade with high efficiency equipment in maintenance. Okay,
Yeah.
where are you now with sub-metering in new and existing buildings?
Oh, Kristen, anything else? Another question?
Oh, did you not hear me? Can you hear me
Oh,
now?
no, I can hear you now. Sorry.
Okay, where are you now with sub-metering in new and existing buildings?
That is a big topic of discussion. Yeah, so we do currently, and it's and it fits into that discussion we just had about AMI, right? Because we currently do require, our preference is for individual metering for new construction. In a lot of cases, though, we will, like for multifamily or things like that, we will allow sub metering. The issue is that sometimes, it's like we require folks to put in sub meters, and it doesn't necessarily serve any purpose, right? Like if no one's actually looking at the meter, if they're not paying any attention to the data. When we talk about AMI, having that advanced metering infrastructure, that's kind of a game changer, because then, we could potentially specify what type of sub-meter folks put in so that we're actually getting that data back into our network, and so that we're able to kind of monitor it and respond to the customers. Next question.
Okay, Alice mentioned 800 people took advantage of the irrigation sub-meter or flow meter rebate. Did this?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, did this include people who purchased a flume device, or was this number only for C&I customers using flow or sub-meters?
So this was just the flow meter. So that was not sub meters. That was just for the flow meter. So it was devices like the Flume or like Flowy, or I think there was another one, Flow by Moen. Most of them are Flume.
Yeah, and it was for residential and commercial.
Yeah, the majority of them have been residential, but we do offer it for commercial customers as well.
Right. Okay. Hi, Alice. Can you talk more about you determined that median turf removal saves more water, hence the larger rebate than a regular turf removal. I would guess this is anecdotal, but I'm wondering if you all did a study to determine this.
I don't know. That's a good question. I'm not sure that we actually did a study. I think it was more anecdotal, and just the fact that, we do get a lot of water-based complaints. We frequently hear from customers like, hey, I was driving down the street and I saw, the city's overwatering on this median, and it's, running off into the streets. And we also kind of, part of the calculus of offering the higher dollar amount for that was just the recognition that it is something a little new and novel, and we wanted to encourage customers to participate.
Alice, we actually did do a look. Dave Langridge, when he was
did he?
took a look at these lawn strip areas, and they were using 3 to 4 times the amount of water they were budgeted for. There was a little bit of data behind it, which actually moved the ball pretty quickly on getting that median rebate.
Yeah, I can believe it, because like I said, I mean, a lot of the complaints we get from customers about water waste, it's median, it's related to medians.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, when will recycled water be more available for schools and cities to water fields?
That's a really good question. I would advise you for that to take a look at our recycle water master plan that came out a few years ago. I do know, so for recycle water, and I used to work in EBMUD's recycle water. That was actually my first job at EBMUD as a, young, bright-eyed, assistant engineer. So I'm a big fan of recycle water. The issue, though, is, as always, it tends to be very expensive. So both in terms of, EBMUD needs to extend the pipeline so that we can reach more customers, and then actually retrofitting those customer sites. So we do have a few programs. We have our partnership with Dublin San Ramon Services District, our DERWA project that's out in kind of the eastern, sort of southeastern part of our service area. That project has actually run into some supply limitation issues, though. Recycled water has gotten so popular, we're not actually connecting any new customers to that system right now. We're trying to find some additional sources of supplemental supply for peak summer use. We also have our East Bayshore project that's at our main wastewater treatment plant in West Oakland. And there is pipeline there that serves, kind of Emeryville, Oakland. And there has been work on extending the pipeline all the way up to like Albany, going along I-80, but it's kind of a slow process. As you can imagine, that those construction projects are very expensive. One thing I will say about recycled water is, East BayMUD is also, we're talking about paradigm shifts. There's just in my time at East BayMUD been a real paradigm shift in terms of talking about things like potable reuse. I mean, when I first started at East BayMUD, you couldn't even couldn't even say the words potable reuse, but now it is something that we're kind of monitoring the state regulations and thinking about whether that's something that would ultimately, factor into our long-term plans.
So Laura Lovett said, I can answer the question on native grasses for lawns. Laura, if you want to put that in the chat, I haven't looked at the chat, so maybe you put it there where you're welcome.
Thank
to
you.
put the Q&A for everyone to chime in on. And it is a topic we want to do in our, for our LAC, we've been talking about with Master Gardeners, and Laura, maybe you want to be a part of it, but people are looking for alternatives for lawn. And we hope to present on low water grasses or alternatives. I'm gonna just check the chat now, but if you do have a question for the presenter, a good place for that is the Q&A button.
And I also welcome
to
reach out to me after the meeting as well, if, or I'm happy to come back at a future date if there's other, questions.
Yes, there's a question about CEUs, and I forgot to mention that at the beginning. This webinar is eligible for CEUs from Quell, Rescape, AWWA, and Master Gardeners. So most of those are you just do it yourself on your own profile, but let me know if you have any questions on that. And then let me see if there's any other questions here. Yes, the person using. Do you all provide leak detection services?
Oh, we do not. Well, okay. So leak detection, I can, while you're looking, Chris and I can kind of talk about what we offer. So we offer leak detection in the sense of, you might be thinking there are plumbing companies that have tools that will actually go out and help you identify the source of the leak. Some of the things that we do offer though is, again, looking at water use data, we send leak alerts. As I mentioned, some of our staff have a sixth sense about leaks, where if they get on the phone with a customer and talk to the customer and look at the water use, they can sometimes help identify what the likely source of leak is just based on the patterns of use. We do things like home water audits. We kind of suspended those due to the pandemic, but we've been offering those virtually, and we're trying to do more kind of commercial audits where we will actually go out and inspect the site and try to identify potential sources of leaks. And then of course we have our home water survey kit that kind of walks people through checking their home's water use efficiency and looking for some common sources of leaks. So we do provide some tools and education and information and resources for customers on leak detection. But we're not like a plumbing company, for example, that might go out and actually like spot us, say this is the spot on your pipe where you have a leak. We just don't have the capacity for that.
Great. And there's a question about gray water. Have you had discussions with health departments about what they would accept in relation to gray or even black water systems? We have found health departments to be the limiting factor for implementation. Yeah,
so, and it is a little bit of a gray area, pardon the pun. I think, the plumbing code was updated maybe a number of years back at this point, so that like those laundry to landscape projects, are pretty straightforward and easy to do without a permit. My understanding is that anything more complicated for a gray water project does require a permit. And it does start to get tricky because, you can start to get into, not just the construction of the system, but sort of the operational needs. We have not, or at least I have not, had conversations with the health department about that. It's a little challenging for East Bay MUD too, because we cross multiple jurisdictions. So we have, Contra Costa, Alameda County health departments. And then I think City of Berkeley has its own health department, which somewhat overlaps with Alameda.
Thank you. And then Laura did put in the chat, Marin chapter of CMPS has a document on native grasses to use instead of lawns. Best choice is agrostis pallets, can be grown and maintained to look just like bluegrass, but it uses a great deal less water. Laura, we may invite you to be on a panel soon. So thank you for that great information. I'm just going to check the Q&A one more time. And oh, here we are. Okay, is getting reclaimed water to university campuses a collaboration with EBMUD? How is it funded?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, one of the limiting factors for sort of recycle water programs is just doing the pipeline extensions, which tend to be very expensive. We have been successful in getting some grant funding for some of those projects. I'm not sure in terms of universities, like I think you're probably thinking, UC Berkeley. I'd have to check with Linda Hu or Florence Weddington in our recycle water program over whether there's actually plans to serve the UC. But as I mentioned, I know we have that pipeline that comes from our East Bayshore facility that goes up along 80, and they've been slowly working on extending that pipeline. It's just extremely expensive because that area is, very heavily congested, and, you're dealing with Caltrans and off ramps and things like that.
Great. This is our last question. Any problems with requiring both compost and native plants for the super rebate, since many native plants might do better in less rich soil? I'm happy to answer that.
Yeah, do you want to go for that, Kristen? So I know you.
Okay, so we did do a lot of consideration around that point, and the super rebate calls for a ½ inch of compost. So it's just a little bit, but it's just enough to give them a boost, not too much to over fertilize them. And you want to look at compost that is vegetation, no animal, and which is lower in nitrogen. And because the soils in our area, we're not in a natural area, they're probably pretty degraded. The compost is going to give them a little boost. And we talked about this quite a bit with CMPS, and they see no problem with adding a little compost for the super rebate. So I think that brings us to the end. Thank you all for all your thoughtful questions and your participation today. We're here for you at any time to follow up and to talk amongst yourselves. Our next presentation will likely be in June, and we're looking at doing integrated pest management panel. So we hope to see you all then. And thank you, Alice, for such a thorough presentation on our water.
My pleasure. And thank you for the opportunity. And again, my thanks to the LAC for helping East Bay Mud to get where we are today with water conservation. And we hope that you'll continue to be a partner going forward. And I should have mentioned our strategic plan is available on our website, ebmud.com. So I invite you to take a look at it if you haven't had a chance yet.
Okay, until the next time. And thank you very much.